John Laurinaitis broke ranks with Vince McMahon in May 2025. The agreement remains confidential. 30 years of quiet corporate management just cracked wide open. You grew up watching the Monday Night Wars, trusting the chairman always had a strategy to beat the heat. Grant filed her suit and Vince resigned the next day. His legal team fired back, demanding the court push the entire mess into private arbitration. They wanted the doors closed and the record sealed. The director stayed silent. But then the former head of talent relations signed a cooperation agreement, and everything shifted. Now look, you don't make that kind of legal turn for nothing. You don't ride with McMahon in one filing, then line up with Janelle Grant a year later, unless the risk has changed. On May 15, 2024, Laurinaitis' lawyer filed to join McMahon's motion compelling arbitration against Grant's claims. You knew the old guard was circling the wagons to protect the brand. You didn't know Janelle Grant's legal team had a trade on the table, and the subpoena phase hasn't even started. By May 2025, Front Office Sports and ESPN reported Laurinaitis had resolved the claims against him. He was dropped as a co-defendant with prejudice, meaning he was out for good. In exchange, he agreed to provide evidence and testimony. See, in the professional wrestling industry, loyalty gets sold like gospel until the legal liability gets personal. Then you find out who was loyal to the man and who was just loyal to the paychecks while the machine functioned. Truth is, the public record lays out a pattern you can track with your own eyes. In February 2024, Ringside News reported Laurinaitis' lawyer claimed his client was actually a victim of McMahon's demands. The lawyer claimed there were professional consequences if those demands were not met. That was the first pivot. He blamed the boss. Then he tried to force private arbitration anyway. Then, a year later, he cut his exit path. He didn't just walk away from the lawsuit, he changed sides. And that tells you the old defense narrative is taking on water fast. Laurinaitis ran talent relations for WWE from 2012 to 2022. 10 years overseeing hiring, firing, and the entire pipeline. According to NBC News, his position put him right in the middle of talent dealings and corporate culture. Grant's complaint alleges McMahon and company leadership built office space connecting Grant's desk directly to Laurinaitis. That layout wasn't an accident. That was access. And access means exposure when the federal subpoenas start flying. Now watch what happens next. The defense attorneys want to frame this as just another bitter lawsuit from a disgruntled former worker. They want fans to believe the facts haven't changed just because one executive reached an agreement. But a civil suit isn't won by cutting a better promo on television. It gets won when internal emails, meeting notes, and direct instructions get read under oath. The filings claim McMahon told executives like Nick Khan and Brad Blum about the nature of his relationship with Grant. WWE publicly stated those executives did not know about abuse allegations before the lawsuit surfaced. The gap between those two statements is where federal cases get won or lost. And here is the kicker. Laurinaitis knows how the chain of command handled internal problems. He knows if questions were asked by upper management. He knows if the company treated the situation as a liability to manage or a human being to protect. You knew the corporate structure kept Vince insulated from public blowback for decades. You didn't know a top executive just offered his internal files, and the evidence-gathering process is about to rip the roof off. This is a federal-level civil suit, and the complaint explicitly alleges sex trafficking. The stakes simply do not get higher. Man, think about what this executive actually watched while the television shows kept running. He was there when contracts got leveraged against vulnerable talent. He was there when complaints reached the Human Resources Department. He was there when millions of dollars moved across the table to buy quiet exits. On June 15, 2022, the Wall Street Journal published a report detailing a $3 million payment Vince McMahon gave to a former paralegal. That was just the tip of the iceberg. Think about the years of forced silence. Think about the careers derailed while executives looked the other way. Think about the toll on the people who didn't have leverage, who got pushed out the back door while corporate kept smiling for Wall Street. Wrestling history is full of bodies, not just in the ring, but in the collateral damage of how the business operated from the top down. The old territories ran on muscle memory, where promoters held all the cards and the talent had zero union protection. McMahon scaled that ruthless system into a global empire. but the raw power dynamic stayed exactly the same. And while the company touted its family-friendly television era, the locker room always knew there was a different set of rules for the guys at the top. When an employee like Janelle Grant signs a non-disclosure agreement for millions, WWE has to balance its financial books. Ask how much total company money went into managing scandals over 3 decades. That number has never been printed. We only see the fragments that leak out when the dam finally breaks. And it breaks because of moments like this, when a man who used to enforce the silence realizes the silence can't save him anymore. You've seen this pattern play out in every institution that consolidates unchecked power. First, the company denies the initial allegations and calls it a targeted smear campaign. Then they try to isolate the problem to one bad actor and claim the executives were blind. Finally, they push the legal fight into a sealed room to keep the documents out of the public eye. Vince denied everything in his first legal response. He denied the claims again when the SEC settled on accounting penalties for undisclosed payments totaling $1.7 million. He denied the core accusations when Grant filed her explosive suit on January 25, 2024. But a former lieutenant turning witness wrecks that predictable playbook. Because a man like Laurinaitis brings institutional corroboration. He doesn't have to prove every single line in the complaint by himself. He just has to prove the pattern of behavior. If his testimony shows the office arranged the desks, managed the contracts, and enforced the quiet exits, then the isolation defense collapses completely. It stops being one man's rogue conduct. It becomes a corporate machine managing a liability, which tells you plenty before anybody hits a witness stand. Here is where it turns, and this is the question that splits fans right down the middle. Some folks want to defend the Attitude Era memories so bad, they will excuse anything the promoter did to build it. They say it is just bitter ex-employees looking for a quick payday. But look at the receipts documented in federal court. Name one WWE executive from the Vince McMahon era who resigned in protest over what they saw happening backstage. Just one. If the corporate culture was clean, somebody would have walked away on principle. If everything was handled above board, some vice president would have called a press conference and blown the whistle. But that list of righteous resignations is empty. That silence tells you the truth about the business. They all stayed in their offices. They all cashed the massive checks. They all looked at the stock price and decided the cost of doing business was acceptable. You knew the system demanded absolute loyalty from everyone on the payroll. You didn't know it would take a federal lawsuit to finally break the code, and we are only seeing the first defector. This is the receipt challenge for anyone still defending the old regime. You can believe Vince's lawyers when they claim the facts remain unchanged. You can pretend John Laurinaitis gave up his spot at the defense table just for a change of scenery. Or you can look at a guy who sat in talent meetings for 10 years, read the legal board, and decided the safest place to stand was on the side of the accuser. A promoter fears two things more than anything on this earth: losing control of the money and losing control of the story. This civil suit threatens both of those pillars, because once a case enters the evidence-gathering phase, you don't just argue over what happened, you argue over hard documents. Subpoenas go out to internet service providers and corporate servers. Testimony gets scheduled with court reporters. People sit down and answer questions under oath, where the penalty for lying is federal perjury. It isn't a television promo. It isn't a storyline you can rewrite an hour before Monday Night Raw goes on the air. And that brings us right back to John Laurinaitis. The man wasn't just a mid-level manager shuffling papers. Talent relations in professional wrestling operates as the nervous system of the entire company. They handle the travel sheets, the multi-year contracts, the disciplinary meetings, and the quiet reassignment of personnel. Grant's complaint explicitly claims she was moved from the legal department into talent relations. That shift matters deeply. Legal is corporate. Talent relations is the old-school wrestling machine. If that move happened after executives were allegedly informed about the relationship, it raises massive liability questions. Who signed the transfer order? Who approved the desk assignment? Who handled the human resources paperwork? A lower-level employee might hear whispers in the cafeteria, but Laurinaitis sat in the room when the orders were given. According to multiple reports from Variety and CNBC, he can speak directly to those internal decisions. He can explain how the chain of command functioned under pressure. He can tell the court if the company treated the situation as a human resources emergency or just another PR problem to contain. Thing is, this is where the identity threat kicks in for the older crowd. You grew up trusting that the rough edges of the business had some kind of moral line. You bought the pay-per-views, you wore the shirts, and you defended the product when mainstream sports writers called it fake. When the federal government indicted McMahon in 1993, fans stood by the company. When various scandals broke over the years, the cycle was always exactly the same. The company denies, the wrestling media chases the rumors, and television rolls on with a new main event. This time feels different, and it feels different because the call is coming from inside the building. When a former lieutenant turns witness, you can't just blame bitter ex-talent. You can't just blame the media having a bias. Grant's filing maps out a network of internal awareness. It names specific high-level executives. WWE hit back, stating those executives had no knowledge of abuse allegations prior to the lawsuit. So the battle line is drawn around who knew what and when they knew it. Real talk. Insider witnesses make terrible news for a corporate defense team. They know the specific industry lingo. They know what counts as a routine meeting and what counts as a crisis huddle. They know who got copied on the emails and who got intentionally left off the sensitive threads. If the defense was built around creating distance between Vince and the allegations, Laurinaitis wrecks that distance entirely. He brings proximity. Let's look at the legal mechanics, because the court docket doesn't lie. For months, McMahon's attorneys fought to enforce an arbitration clause. Arbitration keeps the filings out of public view. It keeps the testimony sealed away. It protects the billion-dollar brand. Then, on May 8, 2025, the landscape shifted permanently. A joint filing submitted by attorneys for both Janelle Grant and John Laurinaitis requested he be dropped from the suit with prejudice. That means the claims against him cannot be refiled ever again. He is out. The trade was his full cooperation. Now think about what that means for the people still in power. The defense narrative wants to maintain a strong united front, but a united front doesn't feature one of its key members signing a separate peace treaty with the plaintiff. When Laurinaitis cut his deal, every other executive still sitting in Stamford headquarters had to run the numbers in their own head. Do they protect the old boss? Do they protect themselves from federal perjury? Do they hope a judge forces arbitration? Or do they read the room and realize the subpoena phase is coming like a freight train? That calculation breaks decades of loyalties. This goes deeper than one man's choices. The wrestling business has always operated on two parallel tracks. There is the public television story sold to the audience and the backstage reality known only to the talent and the office. For decades, the office kept the backstage reality locked down tight. The unwritten code said you never break character, and you never expose the promoter to outside authorities. You protect the illusion, and you protect the massive paydays. Laurinaitis stepping out of that lane shatters the code. You don't have to guess what happens next in federal court. The legal playbook is standard. Once a witness cooperates, every prior public statement gets examined under a microscope. If Laurinaitis can corroborate specific timelines, the plaintiff gains immense leverage. Leverage forces multi-million-dollar settlements, or it forces open trials. Vince McMahon built his entire life around maintaining absolute control. He controlled the television screens, he controlled the roster, and he controlled the narrative. Now he faces a federal judge, a relentless plaintiff, and a former lieutenant who holds the keys to the filing cabinets. Vince denies everything. Laurinaitis cooperates. Janelle Grant's lawsuit moves forward toward discovery. The arbitration ruling still hangs in the balance. And the only thing nobody knows yet is what John Laurinaitis actually handed over when the door closed.